clearly. So welcome, Nigel, and really it's just over to you.
I can just change. Yeah. Well, first of all, it's a real pleasure to join you. I'm really sorry to interrupt the pilgrimage story. As it happens, I was born in Glasgow on St Andrew's Day, 1965, and my English parents kind of fluffed the naming and ended up giving me a very English name, Nigel, instead of calling me Robbie or Bruce or anything except Nigel. So sorry to. So actually I went on my own little pilgrimage back to Glasgow just last week. It's the first time I've been back to Glasgow for many years, and I really agree with the. Sorry, I didn't catch the name of the previous speaker, but this idea that the warmth of the Glaswegians was something I felt really palpably, that Glasgow is looking forward to welcoming the world next November. So in my role as the high-level climate action champion, I hope that I can help Scotland and Glaswegians welcome the world in a way which is part of making that COP a success. So I thought maybe I'll just start by explaining a little bit my background and how I ended up being an obsessive climate person. I guess the two people that influenced me the most in this as often my father, who because he was a climber and an outdoorsman, and I ended up, like many young British kids, being a bit obsessed with the Arctic and the Antarctic, with stories of Scott and Shackleton, and I was lucky enough in pursuit of that to end up spending quite a lot of time in the Arctic as a young man climbing. And in 1987, seems like a very long way away now, in the era when maps were things on paper, not on screens, I was on an expedition to East Greenland, probably trying to outdo my father, as you do. I was supposed to be doing some research on a glacier that drains the Greenlandic ice cap into a fjord called Sermelik Fjord. And we got to the point where the end of the glacier should have been, and all we could see was kilometers of open water with bits of ice floating out to sea. So, you know, as a young climber, my first thought was that I had made a terrible navigation error, because the map is the truth. And it took me quite a long time with my colleague to realize that actually we were in the right place. The glacier was in the wrong place, and it had retreated about 20 kilometers since that map had been drawn. And then from my grandfather, who was from a coal mining family. I mean, we're all descended from coal miners and weavers, basically, in this country. So my grandfather grew up in Wigan, a coal mining family. Scholarship, was a very talented mathematician. I ended up becoming a mathematician as well, but he became a Quaker. He became a Quaker. It's unusual, you know, unusual. It's often in the family as a young man, and I didn't realize quite how much his faith and the principles of that faith, a little bit of perhaps looking a bit askance at formal hierarchies, as the Quakers do, being very inclusive and seeing the light in every human and everybody, and feel a real sense of inclusivity. And some of those values have really infected me. So I'm really driven in this work by a kind of twin sense of a love of wild places that we are destroying, and I mean a sense of sadness and sometimes rage at the injustices of the world that my grandfather taught me. So I'm in this wonderful role now. I have the honor of carrying this out, actually more in for 3 years, because it's for 2 COP cycles, and the Glasgow COP's been delayed by a year. So I have a unique opportunity to do this for 3 years, 2 years with my good friend Gonzalo Munoz from Chile. And then the next COP presidency will go to an African country. We don't know which yet. So I will have an opportunity to work with an African presidency, an African champion, in 2022, before I step down at the end of 22. And as Maureen says, the role was defined in Paris, and it's a strong the mandate comes from the multilateral system. So the countries who agreed the Paris Agreement said, we need, alongside the formal multilateral process between countries, a parallel process that drives ambition and action in what they call non-state actors, which is everyone who's not a government that is a signatory to the UN Convention. So that includes governments like the government of Scotland or the government of California, both of which are very ambitious and progressive and driving change forward. It includes governments of cities like North Dhaka, I think population 16 million, suffering from all the challenges of the vulnerable countries in terms of being low-lying and having mass inward migration when villages in its surroundings get flooded. It also includes businesses and investors, and increasingly we're trying to draw in more of civil society. So it's a real pleasure to talk to you as representatives of the communities of faith, because it's clear that faith communities have a really important role in mobilizing humanity, in mobilizing from a source of love, the kind of action that we need, the tough, tangible action that we need. And in fact, just 2 weeks ago, I was in the Vatican talking with some of the team there about, and of course, the Pope has been part of that multi-faith community, and really, I think that sort of generosity between faiths is a really good illustration of the way that collaboration is a much more powerful source of progress than sort of egotistical self-promotion. Just a couple, I thought it might be worth just explaining a little bit about what COP is and what COP isn't. Forgive me, those of you who are sort of COP geeks, but sometimes the press, even our esteemed BBC, will misreport what the COP is. It is not a moment when the world's governments will come together and renegotiate the International Climate Treaty. It's much more prosaic than that. The big deal was done in Paris. That's why Paris is so, I mean, I think Paris could go down as the most important treaty amongst humans ever in history, because it covered every country, it's very geopolitical, and it's about an existential risk. The COP I like to think of as having three elements which kind of dance together. One is the multilateral process, so the formal negotiation between governments, 195, 196, depending if America is in or out, which depends on the result of the election on the 3rd of November. There is a Paris rule book. So Paris defined the long-term objective and the process of countries coming up with plans and reviewing them upwards every 5 years, what's so-called nationally determined contributions. Not all of the rules of the Paris rule book have been finalized. Some around international carbon trading, around transparency, around how things are reported. Also, some of the commitments made in previous COPs will be reviewed, most notably a commitment from developed countries to support vulnerable developing countries with $100 billion of aid towards adaptation and resilience every year, and to increase that from 2025. So there is a multilateral element, which is really important because it's about trust building. It's about everyone moving forward together. It's of course always about compromise, as in all negotiation. But that's only one leg of the stool, if you like. The other two legs are national ambition, and that isn't negotiated during Glasgow. That's happening now. Some countries have already come forward with their revised plans. Some of them are really bold. Some of them are really disappointing. December the 12th this year will be the 5th anniversary of Paris, and that's a really important day because the French and UK governments and the Secretary General of the United Nations and the UN Climate Secretariat will be hosting an ambition summit, when we expect to hear what the headline ambition is for the 2030 plan for the UK, for the EU. You'll have heard they're talking about 55 or 60% reductions by then. And for many other countries, there are actually over 100 countries have indicated that they will submit more ambitious national plans, even if they haven't done it yet. So that the 12th of December will set a tone. Of course, really importantly, recently we've heard that China will come forward with a net zero by 2060 plan, which is, it's the biggest emitter. That's a massive deal. That alone will reduce the temperature at the end of the century by about 0.3 of a degree. And China has a very good track record of under-promising and over-delivering. So I think I would interpret a Chinese commitment to net zero 2060 to be, in practical terms, be a commitment to net zero by 2050. They consistently follow that approach. Others overpromise and underdeliver. China's tended to underpromise and overdeliver. And of course, depending on the outcome of the American election, we'll either have the biggest economy in the world withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, or coming back in with very strong commitments. So that national ambition will continue to be scrutinised and encouraged to ramp up all the way to Glasgow. The original deadline was the end of this year, but there's nothing stopping countries improving their ambition or implementing more ambitious policies all the way to Glasgow. I think we'll see some of that. And then the third leg is the so-called non-state actors, who I'm mainly working with, and mainly working in the sense of emissions with businesses, investors, cities and regions who have the levers to drive down emissions. And in that sense, we've Gonzalo and I launched something we call the Race to Zero. And the idea of the Race to Zero is to try and demonstrate that the whole of society is committed to getting to net zero across all groups. We've had really good progress. In the last year, the number of businesses, cities, investors, regions, universities committed to zero has more than doubled, and it's that rate is increasing. And we're also then working at a sectoral level. I've just been talking with the global shipping industry about trying to have every sector come to Paris with a roadmap of how they can get to zero, and with, if you like, a critical mass of the main players committed to that. And we won't get there for every sector, but I think we're making really good progress across many, many sectors: shipping, steel, cement, road transport, construction, retail, consumer goods. There's a growing realization and commitment to zero being the goal that everyone has to aim for, and more people committing to before 2050, like Scotland 2045. I think Glasgow's 2030. I think if I'm not wrong, the Church of England has set a net zero Church of Scotland, oh dear, sorry, big faux pas, has set a net zero target of 2030. I'm sure that's more ambitious than the Church of England. I think we're seeing this sort of net zero target becoming a norm from all aspects of society. Last Saturday, we partnered with TED and Future Stewards to host this fantastic event called TED Countdown. I know that Gurjit Singh, who's the TEDx organizer in Glasgow, is hosting a countdown event in Glasgow. There's been over 600 around the world, really trying to mobilize people from every part of the world, from every age group, every ethnicity, every sector of society. That was fantastic. I'd encourage you to look at maybe not the full 6 hours of the video, but maybe the highlight reel. And that's only building momentum. We've also launched a citizen campaign called Count Us In. So I think it's really exciting for me to see what role faith leaders in Scotland and in the UK and in the world can play in mobilizing the communities that you're leading. I know that you've got a lot of ideas and a lot of momentum. I'm not up to date with, I can't keep up with all of the details, but I think one thing that's clear is that the Scottish multi-faith community coming together to drive ambitious change amongst your communities will be a really helpful part of creating a context of ambition and of action. And it's really only from action that hope comes. And we know that hope is so desperately needed. You know, you see the millions of young people who will be coming back on the street as soon as they're allowed, and who will probably be more worried and more angry next year when the latest scientific reports from the IPCC come out, which show that their assessment of the risk is even higher than it was last time. I think that there's lots of things that communities of faith can do. Of course, you can commit to your own operations being net zero. Those of you with endowments and investments can commit to those going to net zero. And of course, you can encourage your communities as individuals all to commit to net zero. We've had some interesting conversations with Church of England recently. I think maybe somebody from
David, David Shreve is here with us today.
David's here, great. So David and I were on a call a couple of weeks ago with bishops, and as I say, I was in the Vatican recently, and with my colleague Shia, really keen to work with you to help you, as I say, create a context of love, of positivity, of action, and of hope, Because final thing I'll say, and then we'd love to hear more about what you're doing and answer any questions and have a conversation, is that although that very technical multilateral negotiation might seem to be one that only involves rational negotiations between technocrats from around the world, it of course is a negotiation between ordinary human beings who are susceptible to the context within which they are carrying out that really important and difficult work. And if that context is fractious, grumpy, negative, it is more likely that those negotiations will fail. And if that context is upbeat, positive, action-oriented, collaborative, one which represents the best of humanity and our love for ourselves, each other, regardless of our differences, and for our planet, then that context will change the outcome of the negotiations without a doubt. So I really look forward to working with you to see how we can create that kind of context when we meet, hopefully physically, fingers crossed, in Glasgow next November.
Nigel.